Peter, on the Supreme Court, we have some polling we can put up on the screen about where Americans stand on who should pick the next Supreme Court justice, even though there is an opening right now. Most people say the winner of the election. If that is Joe Biden, then Joe Biden. If that is Donald Trump, then Donald Trump. When it comes to the choice of Amy Coney Barrett, what is the president hoping to get out of her, and what can he confidently rely on her decision making?
Well, Amy Coney Barrett has been a favorite of conservatives now for a few years. She's particularly popular among anti-abortion conservatives who feel like she is a like-minded jurist who would reopen perhaps Roe v. Wade. She has, at least on one case, I think, indicated that she thought the states ought to have great latitude to restrict abortions. And I think that, her religious background at Notre Dame encourages a lot of religious conservatives that she sees things a lot like they do. The president, I think, is hoping to energize those voters who might have otherwise felt disenchanted because of the handling of the coronavirus or some other issues, might have been turned off by his behavior in office or the way he conducts himself, but will see this court fight as really critical and turn out to vote anyway. Remember, one of the reasons why the president thinks he won in 2016 is because of that open Scalia seat that he then got to fill with Neil Gorsuch. And he showed conservatives that he would fulfill his vow, that he would, in fact, put somebody on that court that they would approve of. This is what he's trying to do now with Amy Coney Barrett, who we think is going to be announced tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock.
I wonder, though, Jonathan Lemire, is there any concern that it could backfire and end up, because the single-issue voters are already in Donald Trump's camp. They were already going to vote for him. Is there concern that it could backfire and end up motivating more Democrats to vote and leave not just Donald Trump out of office, but the Senate majority?
Certainly right now, the choice, just even after Justice Ginsburg died, the idea of a vacant seat and that the president was going to be able to fill it once enough Republican senators gave their blessing has energized both sides of the political divide. Certainly, as Peter just outlined, there is a hope. The White House believes this is going to fire up the president's base, conservatives, perhaps some Republicans that had drifted away from him, those or independents, who might be socially conservative, who took a chance on him in 2016, may have disproved of a lot of what he done since. It's sort of turned their back on him, but now may be willing to come back because of this pick. But no doubt, it's firing up Democrats as well. Just look at the fundraising numbers. Act Blue, the Democratic fundraising operation, has posted record totals over the last week since Justice Ginsburg died. We have seen there is certainly a lot of polling that Americans believe that a right to a safe legal abortion should be the law of the land. And then if there's a perception that Roe versus Wade is on the ballot here and could be indeed jeopardized and eliminated, there is a belief that that could fire up women, Democrats, not just Democrats, but women of all across the political spectrum, particularly in the suburbs, against the president. And that is something that the campaign is nervous about, that they have already seen tremendous bleeding from 2016, support from in the suburbs, particularly among women, college-educated women. And that will be one of the sort of fascinating subplots here in the weeks ahead to see how this Supreme Court pick impacts that particular group. But certainly for the president, they believe this, that their theory of the case has always been that though there may be fewer Americans who approve of the president that disapprove, but the Trump base, they believe the enthusiasm is greater, and they can turn them out at a much higher number than those who are going to back Joe Biden.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.